recently conducted research here at theCUBE Research on Cyber Resiliency, and many organizations are not in a position today to recover the mission critical applications when something big happens. So let's talk a little bit more about what you've seen generally with your customers. I mean, data changes all the time. I think you've surveyed your customers, you know what's going on there. How do they deal with all of this new influx of data? How do you keep protecting without getting to a point where your own system runs out of space? What are the optimizations that you've built in? Because you're getting to very, very high numbers in deduplication. And that's an important point. You may think that your backup appliance or your backup software does dedupe, and sometimes it does, right? But the truth is, the compute it's going to use makes it virtually impossible to really do what you do. So you get some dedupe with backup, which is great. But the truth is you need to really uncompress, to recompress to get to your levels. So can you maybe tell us more about that and about the type of unique technologies you're using to get to these results?
Yeah, I think there were a few different questions in there. So the first one is, what does deduplication really do for backup? When a backup job comes in, the next one that comes in is almost identical. In fact, we have about 5,000 customers installed in 81 countries. 92% of those countries, 92% of those customers report into our health reporting system. And we can see over time that only about 2% of the data changes from backup to backup. So if you're going to bring in a petabyte backup and then another petabyte and another petabyte, it's going to cascade and build up and require a lot of storage and really drive the cost through the moon. However, if you have a petabyte, only 2% of that is changing from then on. It's very small. So what happens is instead of storing a petabyte, you're going to store a petabyte and then just 2% of a petabyte down the line. And therefore you take this much storage and you collapse it to this much storage. And the reason why that works in backup, because each backup is virtually identical except for that 2% change rate. Now, deduplication, though, to do what I just said, is extremely compute intensive. So if you put that into the backup application, it'll drag the backup application to its knees. So you don't see any backup application that has aggressive data deduplication. They all have some, and they'll get maybe 2 to 1 or 3 to 1, and maybe in some cases even 5 to 1, but they're not going to get 20, 30, 40 to 1 that you would get if you really had an aggressive algorithm with a lot of compute. So you know that all of the aggressive deduplication is always done in some type of target site appliance. However, if you do that on the way in to the storage, it's so compute intensive that it is very slow to do that deduplication and then finally write to the disk, and your backup window becomes too long. So you don't want to do it all in the backup app because you'll choke the backup app. You want to do it in the backup storage, but you don't want to do it in line because you choke the performance. So what ExaGrid does is, again, a combination, right? We've always found the sweet spot in the technology here for backup. And the first thing is that we have the data come from the back application to our landing zone. Whether it's deduplicated or not deduplicated, it comes into our landing zone. We do no processing to it at that point, so we keep fast ingest. But then we deduplicate that data in parallel as it's coming into us. We're in parallel deduplicating it into our second tier, the repository. So we don't get that impact, if you will, of the slow performance for the deduplication. Plus, we're keeping the most recent backup in the format that the backup app gave it to us, so we're not impeding the restore speed either. Now, ExaGrid can take backup applications like Veeam, and with dedupe-friendly compression on, we can actually take their deduplication rate and greatly increase it and leave Veeam deduplication on. With Commvault, we can have Commvault leave compression and deduplication on. We can uncompress the Commvault data coming to us and, again, further deduplicate it to a much more fine granular level. With Rubrik now, the Rubrik data comes into us compressed, and with Rubrik deduplication, we uncompress it, we further deduplicate it. So the backup apps will give you some level of deduplication, but they're not going to give you everything you need to fully get the lowest cost storage you can.